you strong, confident woman. He is indeed not a woman. He is very confident though. Don't let him lie to you. He's actually just a little princess. Are you a little princess? Are you channeling your inner diva right now? I gotta film a video, mister. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Heidi and I read a lot of books. At the time of filming this, it's currently March, which is International Women's Month. Now, things like International Women's Month is something that I don't normally pay attention to or celebrate, but I figured this might be a perfect time to make this video in particular, just with it being International Women's Month. I've noticed a lot of personal growth in myself within the past year or so, and I think a lot of it has to do with the types of books that I've been reading. I'm in my mid-20s, so maybe some of this just comes with like maturing and growing up and experiencing life more fully. You know, I'm living under a roof of my own, not with my parents. I'm out of college. I have a full-time job. So I think there's a lot of like natural maturing that comes along with that. But I do think a lot of it comes from the types of books that I've been reading. And there are a lot of books that I've read in the past year where once I finished reading it, I actually felt like I had grown up a little bit more. A lot of these books really changed my perspective on life and on being a woman. So today we're going to be talking about all the books I think changed me to be a better woman, and also books that I just think every woman should read. Some of these have to do with the main characters. Maybe they're really strong female characters, and some of them it's just kind of the overall message of the book is one that I think contributed to me being what I think is a better woman than I was yesterday. All the books that we're going to be talking about today are ones that I have read, so obviously this is just from my own personal experience. I'm sure there are so many other books that could be added to this list that are books that every woman should read, every person should read. Might be books that maybe make you a better woman or more in tune with your feminine side. There is, of course, an unlimited amount of possibilities of books that could be added to this video, but just to keep it easy, we're going to be going through the books that I have read that I feel like significantly contributed to who I am today as a woman, and I hope you enjoy. I do go from woman to witch real quick if I'm not caffeinated, so shout out to Lonnie. Thank you for being my, not really sponsor, but kind of a sponsor. You basically sponsor my sanity, right? Like I pay for the Alani, but you make me a better human being. The first book I want to talk about in this video is actually the book that ended up being my favorite read of 2024, and it is one that I recommend to literally everybody, but especially the women in my life, and that is Lessons in Chemistry. This is the kind of special edition cover, but the other cover looks like this. I love this book, and I think I love this book even more because I didn't expect to love it. Going into Lessons in Chemistry, I thought I was going to struggle. I thought I was probably maybe even gonna DNF it, but I was like, I need to give it a chance anyways. I thought you had to be a genius to understand this book. That is not the case. However, I do believe only a genius could have written this book. I think it just shows, you know, her level of intelligence to write a book up like this, but a book that can be understood at my level of reading, or I think just like anybody's level of reading. Just the writing quality in this book alone, outstanding, but we're not here to talk about that. Lessons in Chemistry centers around Elizabeth Zott, who is kind of coming into womanhood and finding herself in what I would consider the very early stages of the feminist movement. This is fictional, but I would actually consider her to be, in this universe, a pivotal mover in the feminist movement. So Elizabeth Zott is a chemist. I'd say chemistry is an industry where women were not super prevalent. They weren't considered very valuable. They were often just secretaries, the people who needed to go grab the real chemists their coffee and keep the supplies clean, etc., etc. Not for Elizabeth Zott. She knows she's the smartest one in the room and she's not afraid to show it. And Elizabeth Zott, to me, was kind of just the ultimate role model of what I think a woman could be. I feel like sometimes there is this battle between what it really means to be a woman, and what I mean by that is I feel like some women think the only way you can reach peak womanhood is to become a mother, and other people believe the only way to reach peak womanhood is to show men that you can be as powerful and as intelligent and as determined and as successful as the men in the world, and breaking that glass ceiling. Elizabeth Zott balances both of those perspectives and brings them together. It's just a really beautiful story of how you can really be a standout person in a room, and in this time be a woman who stands out amongst men in an industry that doesn't really value women, and really contribute and hold your ground. And it's not going to be easy. She goes through a lot, but Elizabeth Zott goes from chemist to TV show host, but she doesn't change her personality to do this. The TV industry keeps telling her, you know, you should dress cute, dress feminine, talk to women as women should talk, very proper. And she doesn't care. She is going to speak in chemistry terms because cooking is chemistry. She's not going to dumb down the instructions for women because women don't need instructions to be dumbed down. She basically proves to society that women are intelligent and women don't need you to dumb down things to understand it. Women don't need you to dumb down things in order for them to be successful at a new endeavor. Elizabeth Zott also doesn't settle for less. There are men who come into her life who value her for her beauty. They don't value her for her brains, and she knows that she wants to be with somebody who values her for her intelligence and what she really prides herself on. And so she does not settle for less, and she knows exactly what she wants. And ultimately, I think that that is how I would describe this book in a nutshell, is be a woman who knows what she wants and be a woman who will stop at nothing to achieve what she wants. Elizabeth Zott does not box herself into the standards that other people set for her. She breaks through that box and says, you're either with me or I'm gonna leave you behind in the dust. She's also very witty and funny. Her inner monologue is funny. And we also get some really great side characters in this which contribute to her strength as a woman, but she also enables them to stand up and be better people. There's a woman in her life that she influences to become a strong and better woman. There's a man in her life that she encourages to be a good father and shows him what it means to be a good father. And so she doesn't be a better woman by degrading men, and she doesn't be a better woman by stepping on the women who aren't as good as her. She really just pushes people to come up to her level because she knows that they can achieve it. And so I really respected that about her. She is such an easy character to love, even though other characters don't necessarily love her right away because they don't see her potential. But as a reader, you do. This is also a book that I think is not just written for women. All of these books I'm going to go through today are not books that I think only make women better. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned here as a whole, and Lessons in Chemistry is one I recommended to men and women alike. The next book I want to talk about is Circe by Madeline Miller. A lot of people have read Song of Achilles, and it shocks me how many people don't talk about Circe. And I think Circe is such a beautiful retelling of Greek mythology. I studied classics in college, and we actually read this in one of my classics classes after we read the Odyssey, almost as a comparison of like, how do the old epics and the original epics hold up against maybe modern retellings? Do modern retellings do the old epics justice? So I learned a lot from that, but this is a book I read years and years and years ago, and I still think about quite often. If you are familiar with the Odyssey, Circe is a very controversial character. She is considered a witch. She's not necessarily portrayed as the most likable, respectable woman. However, Madeline Miller retells the myth in a way that I think does justice to Circe's character and also doesn't necessarily degrade the original epic, because I think there's a lot of value in the original epic Odyssey, and I think she understands that, and I think she did her research and really just dug into the small little window into Circe's life that we get before Odysseus moves on, and we get a whole book of just about Circe in her life. I think Circe is a very misunderstood character, and so what I got out of this book, and I still feel like I get out of this book to this day, even years after reading it, is just because you are misunderstood does not mean you are in the wrong. Let people misunderstand you. Some people are never going to understand you, and that is okay. That was the lesson I got out of this, is there are going to be people who don't understand you for all of time. There are going to be people who are mad at you and icked out by you for no reason, and they're never going to change. You can't change that about them. I think Circe kind of taught me, and Madeline Miller's retelling taught me to like stick to your guns. There are going to be people who just don't get it, and that's okay. You're not here to make every single person on the planet happy. Stay true to who you are and really grow in your strengths. Your strengths will intimidate a lot of people. Don't downplay those strengths because they'll become your greatest power, and Circe really lives up to that. Next, I want to talk about Remarkably Bright Creatures. This is another debut novel from this author, same as Lessons in Chemistry, and again, this is one where I wish so badly that there was another book from this author. Such an incredible book. It actually was kind of up against Lessons in Chemistry as my favorite book of 2024. What this book taught me about was womanhood at the end of your life. I'll be honest, a lot of the books that I read, whether it's fantasy or romance, the main female character is usually pretty young. She's either like early 20s or early 30s. I don't really read books where characters who are any older than that. In Remarkably Bright Creatures, the main character, Tova, is in her late 60s. She's kind of getting ready to retire. The whole book centers around her life, kind of her reflecting on life now that she's, she has no more children. Her husband has passed away. She's working kind of just because she can. She knows that if she retires, she'll have no purpose. And she basically works at this aquarium and strikes up a friendship with Marcellus the octopus. Marcellus the octopus is such an incredible side character in and of himself. Outside of the plot, the characters in this are so lovable. But I feel like I learned a lot from Tova herself. I think it exposed me to kind of that hindsight is 2020 feeling. What would it be like to look back on your life? What would you be proud of? What would you potentially do different? How would you view friendships and the purpose of life and the meaning of life? Where would you find joy when you've kind of experienced it all? What would you consider accomplishments that maybe you didn't when you were younger? If anybody has recommendations where the main female character is actually older or like heading into retirement or beyond retirement and maybe is like more of a grandmother, I would love to read those. I just feel like there is so much wisdom in age. Most of the books that I read, it's people coming of age. It's people going through maybe their quarter life crisis. I learned so much from her character, the friendship that she strikes up between Marcellus the octopus and other found family members in her life. It's really, really interesting to read about a character who is in her late 60s, maybe even early 70s, discovering found family. I feel like a lot of times we get found family with like college age kids in books or fantasy, you know, young people. Really beautiful, very impactful in a different way. And overall, I think this book just gave me a whole new perspective on life and the patience that kind of comes with time and the ability to forgive, the ability to recover and move on from grief is another big concept in this book. This book just felt like having a long conversation with a grandparent and them just kind of telling you what life is all about. I also want to talk about The Great Alone. I don't have this book physically. I did do it as an audiobook and it was incredible. The Great Alone taught me a lot about, I think, motherhood and specifically relationships between mothers and daughters. I think that this is something that can be very difficult to navigate, not only in books, but I think also in like the real world. I feel like everyone thinks, you know, mother-daughter relationships are absolutely perfect. You know, your mom is your best friend, especially eldest daughters and moms. But a lot of times there's a lot of turmoil there. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of maybe projecting. I just think being a mother is not easy. And it's also really hard to read about motherhood. It can be very emotional. I feel like Kristen Hanna did a really great job of kind of just like ripping back the curtain on motherhood, just exposing the ugliness behind motherhood and also the beauty and strength in motherhood as well. The things that mothers will go through in order to protect their children, even if it seems like they're in the wrong. Everyone, I think, is suffering from some kind of generational trauma, and I think especially in this book, in the time it was set in, I think that was even more prevalent. And so we have this daughter who's kind of watching her mom continue to make mistakes, but as she gets older, she realizes everything her mom did to protect her, the lengths that this mother went through. I think there's a point where the characters have to decide, like, am I going to choose the person I married or am I going to choose my child? And I think that that is a very difficult decision to make, and it really just made me respect women who do have to make that decision. Ideally, you shouldn't ever have to make that decision, but that doesn't mean that people always get to experience that. I have a lot of respect and I think a lot more awareness now that not all marriages are the same, not all parents are the same. This one really made me appreciate my mom more. It was a coming of age story for both the daughter and the mom in this story. The mom had to really like kind of wake up one day and grow up and realize, I need to choose my daughter. I need to grow up. The daughter also had these moments where like she's like, I'm not a kid anymore. Like I need to start kind of waking up. This is the real world. This is what happens in the real world. And life isn't perfect for us. The relationship and the growth between the daughter and the mother in this whole story was, I don't know, it was just beautiful. And also just like breaking the chains of generational trauma and watching that light bulb moment one day where you kind of have this like, it ends here and I'm going to be better than the generation before me. I love that. Another Kristen Hanna book that really made me appreciate womanhood and what it means to be a strong woman was The Nightingale, and not in the ways that I expected. To be quite honest with you, I read The Great Alone and The Women before I read The Nightingale. I did not enjoy The Nightingale as much as I expected to enjoy The Nightingale, but just based off of what people had said. read. However, The Nightingale was one that I grew to appreciate over time. In this story, you get two sisters who are truly could not be more different from each other, which was very interesting but very difficult to invest in at first, at least for me. We have one sister who is a mother, more passive, will kind of just do whatever she needs to take care of her daughter. Her sister is not a mother, and honestly, she would be a really bad mother if she ever became a mother, and that's not me being rude. She even admits that, like, she does not want kids. She would be an awful mother. She's a huge risk taker. She's very abrasive. She says whatever comes to her brain in the moment, kind of flies by the seat of her pants, is very reactive, which are all things that I think her sister balances and kind of shows like a good mother cannot be that abrasive. It sets a bad example. It can also put your family in danger. That sister put her family in danger so many times just because she couldn't shut her mouth, which was hard for me to invest in at first. I actually thought I wasn't going to like this book. I pushed through, and I'm so glad that I did. We get two sides of the same coin when it comes to womanhood in this. We have what it takes to be a good mother, a strong mother, the type of woman who will lay down her life for her children. That is not easy. Not everyone can do that. It's a decision you have to make. Are you going to be that type of mother, or are you going to pick the other side of the coin, which is the other sister, where she knows she would be a bad mother. She would never lay down her life for her children. In fact, she doesn't even want children. However, she uses her strengths, her recklessness, and to be quite honest with you, her bravery to contribute to society and change the world in a way that her sister, who is a mother, never could. Because at the end of the day, a mother thinks of everyone but herself, and then the sister thinks of nobody but herself. And in doing so, really hones her strengths, which can sometimes be her flaws as well. They both, because of their differences, have such different experiences of the war. At the end of the day, they kind of do the same thing. The mother saves people, the reckless sister saves people. What I really appreciated about what Kristen Hanna did here is, again, like I said, a lot of times we either glorify the mother and put down the women who maybe don't want to be mothers, or vice versa. We put down mothers because they're not achieving their highest potential in life and they really need to just like strive for the moon and success. And Kristen Hanna doesn't glorify one over the other. She points out how incredibly different they are and how completely unqualified they each are to have potentially swapped roles. The sister who is a mother could never have achieved what the reckless sister did, and the reckless sister probably would have ended up losing her children and honestly just being a horrible mother. But that's not what they were born to do, and they both knew that from the start. Two things that I took away from this book are: be the type of woman that you know you were born to be. Don't let people tell you you're supposed to be a mother. Don't let people tell you motherhood is overrated. Go, climb the corporate ladder. Not that that's what these characters did, but I feel like nowadays that's kind of like what we're seeing. And the second thing that I learned is neither is better than the other. It is okay to be proud that you're a mother, and it is okay to be proud that you are a successful childless woman. Like, it is totally okay. Just because you're one or the other doesn't mean you are incapable of love. It's two completely different types of love. It's a path that forks, I think, for everybody. At some point, you're going to have to make one of these decisions. Whatever choice you make does not diminish the fact that you are a woman, and a good woman. There is strength in both choices. Do what makes most sense for you. It was hard to like both of these characters, and it was hard to not cheer on both of these characters as well. They were so human, so flawed. They both made mistakes, and at the end of the day, I think that's the point. All mothers are going to make mistakes. If you're not a mother, you're still gonna make mistakes, and you're still going to affect the people around you. You still have responsibilities. You still have people leaning on you just because you're not a mother. Overall, I think The Nightingale made me feel less distressed about one day needing to choose which path I'm going to take, because at the end of the day, they're both amazing. I just need to choose the one that is going to be best for me, and I think all women are going to come to that decision. Whatever you choose, if you actually chose the one that you know was right for you and know plays to your strengths, then it's going to be the right choice. But it's not like one is automatically better than the other before you choose. It's just choose the one that's best for you. And that was ultimately what I took away from this, outside of the fact that it was a really good historical fiction. Another audiobook that I listened to, but actually am planning to get the book and reread, is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. This was such a nostalgic, beautiful, beautiful story. How I would describe it in a nutshell is basically it's Little House on the Prairie, but in Brooklyn and for adults. Like, it's not on the prairie, they're not living in a log cabin, but some of it honestly was kind of giving the same. It was girls kind of coming into womanhood and what it meant to be a kind of more matriarchal family unit. In A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, we partially follow our young female character from birth to young womanhood, but we also get flashbacks into what it was like for her mother to grow up and how her mother became a mom and how her mom comes into womanhood simply by being a mother and her fulfilling her purpose in life as a mother and the struggles that she goes through. Something I really appreciated about this book was the idea of female community. We obviously have our main female character and her mother, but her mother also has a couple sisters and her mother. So we have 3 generations of women who all come together because somehow there's just no way for any of these women to keep a man in their life. And every situation is different. I'm not going to get caught in the weeds there, but we have this grandmother and her 3 daughters, I think, and then they all have daughters and children. We do deal with a couple, more difficult topics like alcoholism, abandonment, overall just poverty in that time in Brooklyn. There's a point where our main character's mom asks her mother, what would you have done differently with me if you could? What advice would you give me in how to raise my daughter? I want her to not have to suffer the way that I suffered, and I want her to not suffer the way that you suffered. An immigrant from Europe come to America. They just kind of have this heartfelt conversation, mother and daughter, on what they would do differently raising their own children. And so she applies this new advice when raising her daughter, and she still makes mistakes. Again, it's just so interesting to see these mother-daughter bonds across generations, and in this story, the efforts that they take to break generational trauma and to make sure that their children don't make the same mistakes they made. It's very flawed. There are a lot of mistakes still made, and I think that that's just realistic. Like, no parent is going to be perfect, especially in this situation where they were under a lot of stress. But the way that the family comes together, and even if the family is arguing, the sisters aren't getting along, when they need each other, they are there, no questions asked. You need money, if you need support, if you need a nursemaid, we are all here. Like, at the end of the day, they are a family. It's the family unit that I personally feel like I don't often get to see in stories like this. And I really came away, like, the story ended and I didn't want it to end. I didn't even know it was coming to an end. There is something so beautiful about reading a book where you follow somebody throughout their entire life and not just a snippet of their life because of a romance or a job or in fantasy because of something big happening, but you don't get the rest of their life. I think I'm just starting to realize I really love books that follow somebody throughout their whole life, especially I think birth to young adulthood, because you get to experience that coming of age with them. I think for many people, one of the most difficult parts about growing up and kind of just coming into adulthood has to do with friendships. That could either be, maintaining childhood friendships through adulthood when life just gets busy, or finding space in your busy life to make new friendships. That is why another book that is on this list that made me a better woman, I think, is Happy Place by Emily Henry. Now, Happy Place is one, it's a lot of people's favorites, and something that really stood out to me about this book in particular, I don't want to say ugly truth, but sometimes it's ugly. The ugly truth of like maintaining friendships that you've had for sometimes decades as you move into adulthood, and kind of just the reality that some friendships are meant to be left in past stages of life. That was something that I really got from this, was there was a disconnect between the characters where they all kind of just started to acknowledge like, hey, we've been going to this summer house for years now, it's kind of our tradition, but we're all kind of like in different stages of life. Some of us are getting engaged and some of us are wanting to start families, and how is that changing who we are as people and therefore making us more or less relatable to each other? I think Happy Place pulled back the curtain of the reality that it is okay to let friendships go. Maybe you don't actually end up letting the friendships go, but it is okay for you to feel at some point with your childhood friends, maybe I don't relate to them as much as I used to. Like, I still love them, I still care for them, I still would do anything for them, but I can also acknowledge we are at completely different stages of life right now. And as much as I love and care about you, there are some things that I know you might not be the person that I go to anymore for advice on this, because you're either well beyond beyond that stage in life that I'm at, or you haven't even come close to it. And that is okay. Everyone grows at their own pace, everyone develops at their own pace, and as we talked about with other books in this video already, some people make different decisions. If one of the main characters wanted to become a mom, she's not going to go to her friend who absolutely has no interest in motherhood. There's going to start to become some disconnects there, and that doesn't mean you can't still be friends. It just means that you kind of need to broaden your horizons and not rely on the same people for your entire life. It is okay to kind of grow up. It is okay to leave some people in the past if they are holding you back, but it is okay to also keep those people in your life while also starting to include new people. That was just one piece that I got out of this book where it made me feel validated for letting go of some relationships. I'm also a strong believer that you become what you surround yourself with. So if somebody isn't serving you or if they're being toxic in your life, it is okay to let them go. And it doesn't have to be filled with a ton of animosity. It is just natural for there to sometimes become more breathing room between adult friendships. It doesn't mean you don't love them. And then another piece of this story that really resonated with me was pursuing your passions, not pursuing what other people want you to do. Our main character in this is kind of prepared her whole life to become a brain surgeon. There's just points where she starts to kind of question, is this actually what I want to do or not? Her decision is completely her own, and I'm not going to spoil that for anybody, but it made me question my life. Am I happy with where I'm at? At the point that I was reading this, am I happy with where I'm at in my career? Is this the career I can see myself growing in? Is this the career that I feel like plays to my strengths and my passions? And if not, what am I going to do? And if so, how can I make sure I don't burn myself out, and how I can continue with that? Despite the cover, Happy Place does cover a lot of more intense, in-depth topics, and I think Emily Henry is really good at covering kind of just what it means to be coming into true adulthood. I'm not talking you're 20 years old and now you're like not living with your parents. That's like coming into young adulthood. These characters are close to 30, if not 30. So maybe it's their quarter life crisis, their midlife crisis. I'm not quite there yet in my own life, but reading these books gives me a lot of perspective of like things that I should start thinking about now in preparation for all of that, rather than have the rug ripped out from under me when I hit 30. And then I'm like, oh dang, like I did not consider any of these options. I didn't even realize I was sleepwalking through life, and now what the heck am I gonna do? So I think I read this book at the perfect time in my life. I read it when I was about 23, 24. If I had to recommend an age range for Emily Henry's books, in particular this one, I would say your mid-20s, maybe when you can find the most relatability with these characters. I think it's a great book regardless, like it doesn't matter how old you are, but I personally think reading it at the right time in my life made it all the more impactful, and it wasn't just like a fun story to read. It actually had a lot of contributions to who I am today, and I learned a lot from it. I'm going to loop the next two books in together because I feel like they kind of followed the same theme, and that is Funny Story by Emily Henry and Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. These I feel like are very different in a lot of ways, but one of the main messages that I felt like these two books left me with was it is okay to stop running away. I feel like not everybody may relate to this or understand this, but if you have a lot of anxiety, there are sometimes decisions that you have to make where you're like, am I going to like run away from the problem? And like, if the problem can't touch me, it can't affect me. And the only way for me to completely control my life is to run away. I have to own everything that I have. I have to do everything by myself because that means I don't have to rely on anybody. That way I don't have to risk being disappointed by anybody. I don't have to worry about somebody abandoning me. In these two books, I saw both of our main characters experience trauma that basically forced them for their young adult and mid-adult lives to just keep running. They couldn't stop running away. They were afraid of planting roots because by planting roots, you risk them being ripped up one day. So they were like, I'll just cut my losses, I'll rip up my own roots and I'll just keep moving. And that's something I definitely related to with these two stories. I've just started becoming okay with the fact that my roots are where they are. I'm okay planting roots here. I don't need to kind of constantly feel this wanderlust, whether it's because of fear or just because of like this anxiety that I'm not going to experience everything in life that I need to. So I need to keep moving in order to like look back on life one day and really feel fulfilled. Like, it is okay to just be at peace with where you are. And that's something that I think these two female characters struggled with in the beginning, but through the relationships that they built with the people around them and the experiences that they had and some very honest, brutally honest conversations with friends, they really found their identity and were confident enough in their identity to settle where they were and not feel like they were settling. I feel like sometimes with anxiety, there can be this feeling of, if I decide to plant roots here, it just means I'm settling. Maybe it's not perfect. It's not everything I imagined. But then they both kind of came to realize, like, nothing will ever be perfect, but am I happy? And am I fulfilled here? That's really what matters. I think we really saw these two characters experience that and grow into that. And it was really beautiful, very relatable for me in that regard. There's also a character in A Funny Story who tells our main character, like, I knew you were a wee girl. And she's like, a wee girl? What is it? She's like, well, we go shopping. We go watch the movies. We love our house. We live in this neighborhood. You know, we love to eat chocolate ice cream. She completely tied her identity to her partner all the time. Again, with the running away, she didn't really want to settle, and so she just tied her entire identity to her partner. Her whole friend group was actually her partner's friend group. And so when she loses all of that, which by the way is not a spoiler, you can just read the description of Funny Story, like you'll understand where that comes from. But when she loses all that, she loses the whole we aspect of her life and actually doesn't have any like I aspect. There's no longer like, we love chocolate ice cream, and now she's like, I don't know what I like. It's no longer we go to the movies on Thursdays. It's I don't know what movies I like. I don't know what I want to do on a Saturday afternoon when I'm completely free. She kind of has to rediscover that she has free will and she's an adult and she can do whatever she wants and like, what does she want to do at that time? I think it was just a good reminder that you can enjoy doing things with people around you and with your loved ones, and you can still maintain an identity of your own. And so it was funny to read about, but also I think that like the way that her friend put it was really funny. She's like, oh, you're a wee girl. Like, I always knew you were a wee girl. But it's also like kind of eye-opening. Like, you have to remind yourself, maintain your identity no matter how happy you are with your partner or with your family or with your job. Still maintain your own identity outside of that. Otherwise, people are just going to start tying you to your job, you to your partner, and not actually get to see the you behind all of that. I'm really excited to talk about this next book because I just finished it, and it is one, when I started it, I did not think it would be a book that I would put on this list. But now that I've finished it, I kind of feel like I had to, and that is The Favorites. I have so many thoughts on this book, and I'm not going to cover the whole thing, but basically the concept of The Favorites is we have Katarina Shaw, who is a female ice dancer. Her life goal is to win gold in the Olympics. To be quite honest with you, she's kind of a tough character to side with for a lot of the book. She is kind of just this person who will bulldoze anybody who gets in her way from achieving her dreams. I think The Favorites really kind of challenged my concept of like what it means to achieve your dreams, what it means to be successful, what it means to forgive and to love. These characters are so flawed. The drama in this book had me gasping. Like, like, to be quite honest with you, these characters were not admirable. They are not stellar role models in the sense that they do everything right. They never make mistakes. They are the epitome of perfection. They are so flawed. However, she is, I think, a rare type of human being who understands exactly what they want out of life and how to get it. She goes through a lot of character growth where by the end of the book, I was cheering Katarina on. I was so excited. I was like, I want her to go to the Olympics. I want, like, she needs to win gold. After everything, she has to win. But she finds a way to kind of mature and grow up. She learns how to get what she wants without bulldozing people over. And that was really what I admired about her, was like her go-getter attitude was like intense for most of the book, but she really takes her life experiences in stride. She learns how to hone her determination and get what she wants while still being compassionate towards the people around her and realizing you can be compassionate and kind to people and still achieve your goals to your maximum potential. I feel like a lot of people think you have to be ruthless to climb the ladder, and she starts that way, and by the end she's really developed into just a completely different woman, and she's looking at these young women who are also cutthroat and ruthless in this industry, and she's like mourning for them because like she's like, I wish I could tell them what I know now. Switching gears, another book that I feel like made me a better woman and made me really confident to be in touch with like girlhood is truly one of my favorite books of all time, and it is Assistant to the Villain. This is a true cozy, low stakes fantasy. Imagine Flynn Rider and Rapunzel from Tangled. I don't know if anyone watching this is familiar with the trend where like he made me love the color pink again. This book is very much like that, especially when it came to like how I felt as a reader. I feel like in the book community, despite being super supportive of each other, there is kind of this like underlying tone of if you're not reading high fantasy or an 8-book series like Throne of Glass, or you're not reading like these super like high stakes or like non-cheesy books, you're not actually a reader. This is cheesy, this is cute, this is a good time, this is not a high fantasy, but I adore this book so much. This made me confident with like being a girl. I'm like okay being girly and like cutesy and like bubbly, and this main character Evie is literally one of the cutest characters of all time. She is so precious. She is the sunshine to his grumpy storm cloud. She has no fear. She is totally okay with just like saying whatever comes to her mind. She blushes, she giggles. She's very cute. She's very feminine. She's very girly. She's very in touch with her feminine side. It is okay to have a female character who is not an absolute badass. I'm all for it, especially in fantasy. I'm all for a fantasy badass female, but sometimes you need a very feminine main character. I feel like a lot of these books have a very feminine side female character because she's too soft to be the main character. Not in this book. Evie is truly the FMC, and she is okay with being girly and soft. She's not ditzy, but she's okay being soft, and she's okay with other people perceiving her as soft. This book made me feel okay wanting to read cozy fantasies and read books about like women who are maybe not like just absolutely like crushing every single person in their path. Like it's okay to be gentle, compassionate, and just loving and kind. Just made me very, very confident overall to just be girly. It's okay to be girly every now and then. It's okay to be girly all the time if that's what you want. It's okay to be girly some days and dress like a fairy, and it's okay to dress like a goth ninja other days. It's okay. Channel your Evie when you want, channel your Aelin when you want, and you know, it's totally fine. You don't have to pick one or the other. Well, speaking of Aelin, of course, I have to talk about these two books. Honestly, just the whole Throne of Glass series, but Empire of Storms and Kingdom of Ash in particular are the two books where I really started to love Aelin's character and really see everything that she was doing in the other books start to come to fruition. I really started to appreciate her cleverness and her strength here. We have this do not be afraid attitude, this conquer the world attitude. Aelin really taught me stand by what you believe and don't give up. Do not be afraid. Outside of these, like it's okay to be clever and cunning and be a sarcastic little bitch if you want to. Like it's okay to be those things because she did it in the right way where like she wasn't just doing it for like shock value. She's doing it because she actually knows what she wants and she's gonna go get it, but she knows how to build a community. If we're talking about like Katarina Shaw from The Favorites, she wasn't interested in community. Like if she was gonna get there by herself, all the better for it. She didn't care. Aelin builds her community. She knows where her allies are and she knows the value that they bring to her cause. She's a very intelligent character. I also want to take a moment to appreciate two other female characters in this series, and that is Elide. Elide is very, very soft and gentle, a lot like Evie, but that does not mean she is weak. And then we have Lysandra, who literally went through hell and back multiple times to become the woman that she was by the end of this series. Something that I think Sarah J. Maas does really well with the Throne of Glass series in particular is the fact that while we know the entire story revolves around Aelin, it's hard to say that she is the only main character, especially when it comes to the women in this story. I think towards the end, especially, we have Aelin, Lysandra, and Elide all as the main golden trio of characters, and there are several others off to the side. Obviously, there's Manon as well, but I think for me, the characters that I really resonated with personally were Lysandra, Elide, and Aelin. Manon I love, but I didn't love her until like the very end. She was one that really grew on me. I think there is is a strong female character for everyone in this series. And while we all kind of universally seem to agree that Aelin is the epitome of them all, I think when it comes to those like three side characters, Manon, Elide, and Lysandra, and now that I'm talking about it, I mean, we have so many side female characters outside of those three. So it's really hard to just kind of like boil it down to them. The only reason I'm saying that is like, for me personally, the character that I resonated with the most, loved the most, was actually Lysandra. And she was not one that I thought I was going to love. She's also not one that I feel like gets talked about enough. Normally it's like Aelin and Manon and they kind of overshadow everyone else. When you get a really good side character who is written well and in a very dynamic way, you can still learn a lot from their characters and what they go through. And you don't get this with side characters who are there basically just for fluff. And that is something we do not get in this series. The side characters are almost main characters themselves. But if you want to learn how to be a strong woman who basically is a bulldozer, you'll look at Manon. If you want to look at a strong woman who is absolutely like the most clever character I've ever read in my entire life, who also has no fear, and even when she's afraid, she perseveres through it all, you're gonna look to Aelin. If you want a female character who has been through hell and back, can barely remember who she was or who she decided to become, you're going to look at Lysandra. If you want a female character who is soft and gentle and vulnerable and brings out those vulnerabilities in the characters around them and reminds them to be in touch with their humanity and not just plow over everyone for the sake of their goals, you're going to look at Elide and the way that she affects the characters around her and softens the characters around her. There is incredible relationships and friendships in this series, but what I loved most about Throne of Glass was watching how each character stood alone but also impacted the characters around them. You see Aelin's cleverness wear off on Lysandra and they start to go in on planning things together and not letting people in on it. You see Manon soften from being around Elide. This character development that we see between all of these women, you just don't get a series like it. To say that Throne of Glass is a story about Aelin is not doing justice to the series. When I think Throne of Glass, I think of 15 different characters. I can't just think of Aelin. Sometimes like it depends on my mood, but sometimes like I only think about Manon, and sometimes I only think about Lysandra, and sometimes I only think about Lorcan or Rowan. It really just kind of depends on the day. I mean, don't get me started on Dorian and Chaol, but this series I think really made me a better person. It made me braver. I loved everything that she achieved in this series. This is the epitome of what I think a fantasy series should be. It kind of applies to all audiences. She did it really well, and it's hard to not include this series when it comes to talking about best female characters or best books for women to read. This series may not be for everybody, and for me, the beginning of the series wasn't even my favorite part. Like, these two books I think were my favorites. Overall, just the female characters and how they impacted the world around them was absolutely incredible and something I think about on a daily basis. And I know that everyone kind of says that. If you really dive into analyzing this series and what Sarah J. Maas was doing with these characters, they're all just so different and they all represent different pockets of what being a woman means. And somehow they all come together and it's just like this powerhouse, almost the divine female. You get all of these female characters come together, and when they work together, you get the epitome of like what true female power and strength could be. On the topic of like Aelin being able to conquer her fears, they have this phrase where it's like, my name is, and I will not be afraid. And just this, her ability to remind herself to stay strong and to not crumple in the face of fear. Another book that really kind of drove that home for me was Dune. I don't want to talk too much about this book because there's a lot going on here that I feel like it was just like a sci-fi story. It wasn't one that made me a better person. Something that is very prevalent in this series is the Bene Gesserit kind of mantras that they have. And at the beginning of each chapter, there's a lot of like mantras that this, I don't want to call it a cult, but that this group kind of says and becomes. And one of these mantras is fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. That's really intense when you think about it. Just boil it down. Fear is the mind killer. As somebody with anxiety, that line really stood out to me, and this whole book, it's driven home so many times repeatedly throughout Dune. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the mind killer. I did the audiobook for this, so I'm listening to this and it's like listening to like positive affirmations. Fear is the mind killer. Do not allow yourself to be afraid. It is the little death. It'll bring you total obliteration. It will ruin your life. If you just kind of say that over and over to yourself, and I did for a while, I started just waking up every day and just going, fear is the mind killer. Do not be afraid. I overcame so many anxieties that I had at that point, and I still have, but it's so much easier to manage. I even created a bracelet, like a friend, we were making friendship bracelets, and I just put fear is the mind killer on my bracelet, and everyone was like, that's kind of dark. Like, but if you know the bigger story, it is such an incredible affirmation to repeat to yourself. Fear is the mind killer, because this is what fear does to your mind and your soul and even your body sometimes. Dune is so much more than just that line, but I think overall that line was what I took with me in my day-to-day. And it's something that you don't have to read the whole book to get that point, but it's a quote that I want to share because I think it's one that if more people lived by this mantra, you would find that you are able to tackle and achieve more things than you're giving yourself credit for. The 7-Year Slip was one of my favorite books that I read last year. It is one to this day I still think about. I love the magical realism in it. This one in particular was about a girl who kind of had two things that she was going through. One, she's not really necessarily satisfied in her job, and two, she's going through grief. She's lost a very important member of her family, and now she's learning how to navigate that. We kind of just experienced this healing process of her being able to like go back in time and see this family member and kind of just experience what life was like back then, taking those memories and bringing them back to the future with her. Healing from grief doesn't necessarily mean forgetting everything happened, so she's learning how to cope not by forgetting what happened, but by finding joy and peace in the memories that she has and using those memories to kind of continue the legacy of the person who she lost and was very important to her. I am very fortunate to say at this point in time, I have not experienced the level of grief that the main character Clementine has in the 7-Year Slip, but it is a book I know I will be turning to when that day comes, and it's one that I think is very eye-opening, and it's a good reminder that not all good things last, to really take advantage of the time that you have with the people that you love, because it is an unfortunate reality that not everyone is going to be around forever. And it's also something that weirdly every single person in the world goes through grief and loss of a loved one, but it's something that we just don't talk about it. We don't openly talk to our friends about like, hey, I lost my loved one. Here's how I want to help you prepare for losing a loved one when that time comes. It's always reactive instead of proactive. So for some reason, reading the 7-Year Slip for me felt like a proactive step, adding a tool to my tool belt, which I don't want it to sound morbid like that. It's just one of those books where it definitely has real life applications. And this is one I could see a lot of people turn into this book and finding comfort in times of grief. And for me, it wasn't a time of grief, but it's something where I was like, here's the reality. Set in a romance, but here's a reality of what people go through and something we will all face one day and how to prepare for it, and somehow just spun into this beautiful narrative. It is definitely one that I feel made me a better woman and made me more adequately prepared going into the next stage of adulthood that I'm in. One of the last books that I want to talk about, which again is not a book that I would recommend to everybody, but is one that really spoke to me and I think would speak to people like me, is Daydream. I think this series has like a reputation for being just like a college kind of cute, low stakes romance, which is true. However, in this book in particular, it focuses around two more introverted characters who find companionship with one another. They also have some other issues that they're working through, like people pleasing, anxiety, social anxiety, anxiety around building friendships, kind of the pressures of like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I think this book was written for introverts. This book was written for the people who pretend to be something that they're not just to fit in with societal norms. This really spoke to me for that reason. This book gave me permission to be more in tune with who I actually am. And it gives me permission to take time for myself to recharge and to say say no. If you're an introvert, you kind of feel a lot of pressure to say yes to every social activity because you might offend people, or you might seem like you're antisocial, or it might come across the wrong way, like that you may not actually like these people or want to hang out with them, when like that's not the case. It's just like we do not get our energy from being around people 24/7, and that is okay. Like, we've normalized it being okay to be an extrovert, which it is, but we also need to normalize it being okay to be an introvert. Like, it is okay to not get energy from being around your friends. I always joke with my friends, because we're all introverts, and we always joke like we are okay seeing each other once every 2 to 3 months. I think these characters really embody those realistic experiences that I've had, and I think a lot of people have had. And I did post a full review of Daydream on my channel, which talks more about this, because I don't want to give any spoilers. But if you're somebody who's looking for a book that really validates your feelings of introvertedness or social anxieties, this one definitely does that. I think it was her best book overall, not just because I related to it, but I think the writing was better in this. And it's one that if I know somebody is introverted, I do recommend this book to them, just because it's very validating, and it just kind of felt like being wrapped in like a hug of acknowledgement that like it's okay, and like go take time for yourself. And I'm proud of you for taking some quiet time. I'm proud of you for stepping away from a situation so you could take time to process it and then come back with a response or a reaction, because sometimes it's intense to have to respond to something right away, and then it causes us to not respond in the way that we actually wanted to respond, and then there's more anxiety built up about that. Anyways, all that being said, this is a perfect book for introverts, and as a woman who identifies as mostly introverted, I'm good at faking it, but it's kind of nice to give myself permission every now and then to actually be who I want to be. And that is somebody who recharges with a book in complete silence with my earplugs in a dark room with a candle lit. That is how I recharge. This book just kind of showed me that that was okay. And then the last book I want to talk about is actually a really short one, so this book kind of applies to everyone, but it is The Many Deaths of Laila Starr. This is actually a graphic novel. Really, really beautiful artwork in this one. I loved this. The premise of The Many Deaths of Laila Starr, basically death finds out that there is going to be a human born who defeats death and creates immortality. And so death goes down to basically this person, and she just can't do it. Every single time something gets in her way and she ends up dying. So death keeps dying while she's trying to eliminate this person who's going to eliminate death, and she's reincarnated over and over and over. And throughout her reincarnation experience, she keeps encountering this boy who becomes a teen, who becomes a man. She keeps encountering him throughout his lifetime. Every time she encounters him, she learns something more about life. She used to only kind of have this appreciation for death because that's who she is. And each time she's reincarnated, she lives life a little bit more to the fullest. She develops a little bit more compassion each time. It's a really quick book. You can read it in a sitting, probably like an hour if you don't get too caught up in the pictures, which I of course did. This was actually the last book that I read last year. What a way to end the year. I learned so much about living life to the fullest. It was such a good one to go in. Like, if you're starting to get your like resolutions ready, this is such a good book. I cried while reading this book, which I was not expecting. We just kind of follow these two characters as they experience life and love and loss and death and selfishness and selflessness for the first time. You see death almost become more human with each reincarnation, which is just an incredible feat for an author in such a short story to achieve that level of depth. And then also the artwork really contributes to it. I don't know if the story would have had the weight that it has without the artwork. So I think that that is a huge contributing factor towards it. But this is a book I actually would say that every single person needs to read at some point in their life. But that is all I wanted to talk about today, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in more book content, please feel free to like and subscribe. I post only bookish content and I post weekly, so hopefully if you like this little corner, you'll stick around. Feel free to drop a comment on a book that made you feel confident, or books that maybe you just feel like made you a better person overall. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. I feel like the books that I chatted about today, most of them applied to women, but a lot of them I feel like are good books to just read in general and are books that I would recommend to anybody. Talking about all of these books, really, it made me feel so nostalgic, but it also reinstated the confidence that I received received when I read them the first time, and I'm already rereading some of these books just to kind of get that feeling again. So these are ones, I mean, they're just timeless for me, truly. But Teddy is here telling me that he's ready for a little walkie, so I think it's time to wrap up this video. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Love ya.